This week on the Retirement Quick Tips podcast, I'm answering the question, how much car can you afford in retirement? Once you understand the current car marketplace, which is what I talked about on yesterday's podcast, I think the next logical step is to decide whether you want to buy a used car or a new car. I think it's a good idea to consider multiple options. Like narrow it down to 2 or 3 choices. One of those might be a brand new car, and maybe 1 or 2 of those are a used car. It can vary, but the math has changed since the pandemic on this because the old school personal finance, like Dave Ramsey-esque advice was pay cash, buy a used car that's a few years old, get a good, reliable used car. And that's how you can keep your finances in order and not overpay for a car and not have a stupidly high car payment. The problem with that, though, is that the math on this has changed significantly since the pandemic because prices on used cars have been insanely high and new cars are just not depreciating at the same pace. I remember 10, 15 years ago, you could find a decent quality used car for 15, 20,000. And now it's like you can't get that and expect the car to even run. Like most used cars are, I would say, minimum 25,000 all the way up to like 50,000 if you're looking for a newer, only a couple years old and reliable car with decent miles. You're not buying a lemon here. We can't be buying a lemon in retirement. So there's just not that many cars to go around. The prices on all cars was insanely inflated. So you just can't get a decent used car anymore for like 10 or 15,000. Again, it's more like 30 to 50,000 on a lot of cars when you're buying used. And so that makes it a lot harder to follow the advice of paying cash because it's harder to save. It's easy to save for a $10,000 car, especially if your previous car had some trade-in value. Great. But if you're looking at a nice used car and saving 30 to 50,000, well, that's a bigger nut to crack. So you want to keep that in mind, and that does complicate the decision. I mentioned yesterday, I've only bought 1 car in my entire life, brand new off the dealer lot, and that's the car that I have right now. I like having a new car. It's nice having all the bells and whistles. It's nice having the brand new warranty that's not going to expire for several years still. So there definitely are benefits. But do you overpay when you buy a brand new car? Yes, for sure. But the difference, the delta between a new car and a used car isn't the same as what it was. I think it will return to that. Like that should continue to normalize over the next couple of years. So if you're looking to buy a new car, I would start by looking at used cars that are, 2, 3, 4 years old. See what those are selling at currently compared to what the new version of that car is selling for. Another important consideration for retirees when you're thinking about buying new versus used, and I think makes used a little bit more compelling, is that you're not going to drive as much. Now, this may not be true. Like if you're living the RV lifestyle, if you're doing a lot of road trips, you may be driving more. But for most people, they're not driving as much when they're retired. They don't have a daily commute. They're going to have less wear and tear on their cars, less mileage, less gas expenses, things like that. And also what you plan to use the car for might change. So I find that maybe if you needed a truck or like in our family, we need a big baby hauler. But if I fast forward 15 years and my husband and I are getting close to being empty nesters, well, I don't need such a big car that holds so many people anymore. And then obviously the reliability, that is extremely important. I've mentioned this a couple times already. Something that retirees don't necessarily think about when they're buying cars is that it's going to tilt you in the direction of buying something a bit newer. Now, it doesn't have to be brand new, but something newer where if you don't want to have maintenance or repair problems, things like that, that could be costly. You can still finance used cars, but usually that's going to be more expensive than if you buy a new car and finance that through the dealership. So depending on who you're buying from, whether it's a dealer or a private party, the rates on the loans could vary greatly. So again, if you narrow down a few different options, new or used or a combination of both, then gather the information, figure out what the financing it would look like. What would it cost if I just paid cash? If it's a new car that you're considering, what's the cost of a lease? So then you can start to do some apples to apples comparison because it can be really confusing to compare the options. But just know that from a financial perspective, you're going to be better off buying used. Most of the time, a new car will depreciate quickly. Now, it hasn't done that as quickly as it used to. But again, that was a COVID issue. We're returning to a more normal car market. I think you'll see prices on new cars will depreciate at a more normal pace. So again, I think going forward, it is better to buy used in most cases. In an ideal world, the best long-term financial decision for most retirees is going to be anticipate when you need to buy a car, set aside the funds that you'll need so that'll be accessible to you and you can pay cash for all or most of the car and finance little to nothing. We don't want to overpay for something. We want to buy a good quality, reliable car. Ideally one that's 2 to 4 years old because a lot of that depreciation has already occurred. And even if you still needed to finance some of the purchase, saving up, having some trade-in value so that you can put a significant portion of the car price as a down payment, that will help to keep your monthly outflow and your payments low. I think that's the most prudent thing for retirees. Most cars in this sort of 2 to 4 year lifespan, they still have some warranty coverage. And when they do expire, then you can decide if it makes sense to buy an extended warranty. But we don't want to overpay for a brand new car just for things like the warranty or because it has all the fancy new technology and bells and whistles. As long as you choose a reliable car, you may not even need an extended warranty when you're buying a used car once that initial warranty expires. So I prefer this route. Don't be the person who's like, last minute, I need to buy a car. I'm going to sell some of my investments, probably pay some income tax or at least capital gains on that withdrawal. That is probably the worst decision, worse than financing in many cases. Not only do you have tax and timing issues that come with selling, but there's also that trade-off there of selling that investment and the opportunity cost of leaving that money invested. So better to set aside the funds in a cash money market, do so over a period of time. If you don't already have that money set aside in savings, but better to do that or even have hopefully modest monthly loan or lease payments than liquidate your retirement assets last minute and use that to buy a car. So as with most financial decisions, it's all about doing your homework and planning ahead. That will set you up for success. All right, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Ashley Mitchikay, and this is the Retirement Quick Tips Podcast.